Hey guys, Jennifer here with the Family Fudge, and at our house it is officially pumpkin season. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you 5 of the Pioneer Woman's most popular pumpkin recipes, and my kids and I are going to let you know which recipes we like, which ones we probably wouldn't make again, and which recipe was the winner. Now, I have to admit, even though we love pumpkin goodies at our house, I don't often make very many pumpkin recipes at home from scratch myself. I usually just end up buying things like pumpkin muffins, pumpkin pie, and pumpkin pancake mix at places like Trader Joe's and Costco. So I'm definitely a rookie when it comes to pumpkin recipes. Just come along with me today as I share my pumpkin recipe journey. I love all things Pioneer Woman myself, and I've collected so many of her cooking supplies and her cookbooks over the years, and actually a few years ago I had the opportunity to take a tour of the ranch and mercantile where much of her cooking show is filmed. It was so much fun. And speaking of fun, so is getting to test out a bunch of her pumpkin recipes. Now, with this recipe, there is a step before you can get started. Well ahead of time, you're gonna need to freeze the pumpkin pie mix. And you guys, for this recipe specifically, I am using pumpkin pie mix and not just pumpkin puree. You know, pumpkin pie mix has extra sugar and spices already added in, so if you use plain pumpkin puree in these smoothies instead, it's probably not going to end up very tasty. This recipe calls for just 15 ounces of this pumpkin pie mix, but I could only find a big can of it. So I'm going to go ahead and freeze some in this container, and then with the other half, I'm going to add it to an ice cube tray and then pop it in the freezer. That way I can just take out 1 or 2 frozen cubes of pumpkin anytime I want to make one of these smoothies. And now moving on to the graham crackers. These are really meant as just a garnish to sprinkle on top of the smoothies. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and crush them up a bit. And honestly, I think if you don't have graham crackers, you could totally just leave this part out. Next, to my blender, I'm adding 3 cups of milk, half a cup of vanilla Greek yogurt, followed by the frozen pumpkin pie mix. And then lastly, I'm also adding just a few dashes of cinnamon. And that's all there is to it, guys, just a few ingredients in these smoothies. And now for my official taste testers. As you can see, this one scored pretty high with all of the kids, and when I add my vote in there as well, this recipe gets an overall score of 4.5 stars. This definitely was more like a pumpkin shake rather than a smoothie. And if I made it again, I would probably throw in a few ice cubes to get more of that smoothie texture. And I would personally replace the regular milk with oat milk, but that's just me. Oh yeah, and this is what happened to our graham crackers. They're kind of just soggy at the bottom. I'm going to start by adding 3 cups of flour to my mixing bowl, but instead of regular flour, this recipe calls for cake flour, which according to the box has a finer texture. To this, I'm also adding some salt, baking powder, and sugar. Now I'm going to whisk this to combine and then set it aside. In a separate bowl, I'm adding the pumpkin puree, and you guys, for this recipe, I am using pumpkin puree, not pumpkin pie mix. Next, I'm adding in the eggs, the vanilla, some pumpkin pie spice, and the milk. Now I'm slowly adding my wet ingredients to my dry ingredients, and as I'm starting to combine, the recipe does say not to over mix this. I think the reason is that if you over mix it, the pancakes might come out tough. But as you can see with this batter, there are still quite a few lumps in it. This recipe does say that the pancake batter should be pourable, so if it's not, you can add a little bit more milk. And now for my official taste testers. Now honestly, I think my kids were trying to be nice with their votes on these, or maybe it was the maple syrup and the whipped cream that increased their rating. With my vote included, we ended up with a score of just 3.5 stars. And I think that's because these pancakes really didn't have much flavor at all. I think that a little bit more cinnamon would definitely make them better. And then personally, I do like pancakes that are on the fluffy side. And these are definitely more flat, dense, and kind of chewy. And I think it's because of all of the pumpkin puree in the recipe. Okay guys, now I have to warn you, just looking at this recipe, I can see that it's not difficult, but there are quite a few steps and you're going to need a lot of bowls. In a saucepan, I've already melted my butter, then I whisked in some pumpkin puree and some pumpkin spice. To this, I'm also going to be adding half a cup of boiling water. Now, this is actually my first time ever making a sheet cake recipe like this, so I'm not exactly sure why you need boiling water, but if you guys know what the reason is, please let me know in the comments down below. In a separate bowl, I'm going to combine the dry ingredients. This is just a mixture of flour, sugar, and salt. Then in another bowl, I'm going to combine some buttermilk, eggs, baking soda, vanilla extract, and the recipe also calls for maple flavoring. It is optional, but I'm going to go ahead and add it in here because I love all things maple. Now I'm just going to alternate adding these ingredients, mix to combine, and then it's ready for the pan. Now, technically, this recipe calls for an 11 by 17 inch pan, but I have this one, which is slightly larger, so hopefully that's okay. This recipe does say to spray the pan really well with non-stick spray before you add in the cake batter. Now I'm cooking this at 350 for about 20 minutes. And honestly, this pan seems really full, so I'm crossing my fingers it doesn't spill over in my oven. Okay guys, now here it is, fresh out of the oven. The maple scent is really strong. At this point, I'm going to let this cake cool down completely, and then it'll be time for the frosting. The frosting recipe is actually really simple. It's just a mixture of powdered sugar, room temperature cream cheese, softened butter, a pinch of salt, and a tablespoon of cream. Then this recipe doesn't actually call for nuts, but I'm gonna go ahead and sprinkle some chopped pecans all over the top because that just sounds like a tasty combination to me. Wow, you guys, I'm actually shocked by how good this sheet cake is. It is super moist, it's not too pumpkin-y, it has just enough spice to it, and the frosting isn't too sweet, so I am loving this. With my vote included, we gave this recipe 5 stars. It is definitely my favorite so far, and it has me thinking about other sheet cakes that I should try making in the future. For these muffins, in the original Pioneer Woman's recipe, she does include cream cheese frosting as an option, but I'm gonna go ahead and not make frosting because I want these to be muffins and not cupcakes. In my large mixing bowl, I'm adding flour, sugar, baking powder, and then a combination of cinnamon, ginger, and nutmeg, followed by some salt. Next, I'm going to cut in the butter, and that just means I'm going to break up this cold butter into little pieces just like this. And this is kind of like you would do if you were making biscuits. I'm going to grab a different bowl, and in here I'm going to add my wet ingredients. This includes pumpkin puree, evaporated milk, and vanilla. I'll go ahead and mix that together. And then because I forgot about it, at this point I am going to go ahead and mix in 1 egg. It was supposed to come earlier. I'm going to combine the wet and the dry ingredients together, and then this mixture is ready to go into the muffin pans. In the original Pioneer Woman recipe, it calls for using 12 regular size muffins, but I did decide to go with mini muffins instead. Once these are all filled, I'm going to sprinkle the top with a mixture of cinnamon, sugar, and a little bit of nutmeg. I'm baking these at 400 degrees for about 18 minutes. This recipe ended up making 24 mini muffins with enough left over to make a few extra. So now that these are totally cooled down, it's time for a taste test. Overall, these were pretty tasty, but not my favorite. They did seem very light and airy. We gave these muffins 3.5 stars. Now, I'm gonna start this recipe by cheating. You're supposed to crush up 7 full sheets of graham crackers, but I'm gonna go ahead and use 3.6 ounces of these graham cracker crumbs instead, just to save time. To these crumbs, I'm going to add 5 tablespoons of melted butter, and once I have this completely combined, I'm going to add about a tablespoon or so into each muffin liner. Now I'm going to press the crumbs flat to create a crust for our cheesecakes, and then they're going to go in the oven at 350 for about 5 minutes. For the filling of these cheesecakes, I'm adding 1 block of room temperature cream cheese, some brown sugar, and some maple syrup. Now I'm going to beat this for 2 to 3 minutes using a hand mixer, and I really want this to be nice and smooth. Next, I'm adding in the eggs, and once they're completely incorporated, I'm adding in the pumpkin puree, vanilla extract, the cornstarch, followed by a mixture of cinnamon, ginger, and nutmeg. And lastly, a little bit of salt. Once that's completely mixed together, I'm going to evenly divide it amongst all of the muffin cups. Then I'm going to pop these in the oven at 350 for about 10 to 12 minutes, or until the centers are just slightly jiggly. Now the hard part, you guys, the waiting. You're gonna wanna let these cool down for at least 30 minutes, then refrigerate them for at least 1 hour. But I ended up keeping these in my fridge overnight. I'm going to finish them off with a bit of whipped cream, and then it's time for a taste test. We were quite split on these cheesecakes. Some kids liked them and some kids didn't. The overall score came to 4 stars. These mini cheesecakes had kind of a strong pumpkin flavor, and I honestly think that they would taste a little bit better if there was more sugar and more spices. Overall, they did have a really nice texture, and I would make them again. Now, overall, the #1 recipe for us was definitely the pumpkin sheet cake. Now, like I said about this recipe, there were a lot of steps, but none of them were particularly hard, and I think totally worth it. It was seriously so tasty. In fact, I'm thinking about this Thanksgiving not bothering with a pumpkin pie at all, but instead making this pumpkin sheet cake. But you guys, let me know in the comments down below which recipe was your favorite. And if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this in the future. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.